Hi, I'm Laurie Power, Director of Evangelization and Discipleship at Christ the Redeemer Parish, and welcome to Talking Saints. I'm here today with my co-host Peter Sanchez, reporter for the Catholic Star-Herald. Hi, Pete. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, Laurie. Thank you so much for coming into the vault again today.
Absolutely. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about today's saint, his life, and how his example can inspire us, because as Pope Francis reminds us, to be saints is not a privilege for the few, but a vocation for everyone. So, Peter, who are we celebrating and talking about today?
Well, today is June 22nd, and we're talking about St. Thomas More, somebody who I've got the privilege to learn about these past couple of years, and we talked a bit before. Fantastic movie, A Man for All Seasons.
Yes. If you have not seen that movie, just stop listening for a second, track it down, watch the movie.
Yeah, take like 90 minutes or so, because it's not
long.
No, it's not Avengers length, 3-hour movie. But it's a very good movie with, totally blanking on the guy's name. I just had... Anyway, It's a good movie from 50 years ago. Watch it.
A Man for All Seasons.
Man for All Seasons. So, Laurie, why are we talking about St. Thomas More today?
Well, I'd like to start with a quote. We seem to have a string of martyrs we've been discussing lately, but maybe that's a sign of the times. I don't know. But he said upon his death, I die the king's good servant, but God's first. So Thomas More was someone who was politically involved and even had a political position. And when it came down to it, he really had to choose between, keeping his position or following his conscience and doing what he believed God was leading him to do. And he, of course, chose God and is the saint because of it.
And I think he's a really good example, too, Laurie, of somebody who really... He didn't let politics compromise his morality.
Oh, that's true.
Today, I don't want to make this too political, but I really do appreciate a politician who believes what they believe and their morals, their personal beliefs come first. And for Thomas More, his faith was paramount to anything else. And as you'll see in a bit, that got him into a lot of trouble.
Yes.
But
he didn't want to be a martyr, but when it came down to it, he wasn't going to compromise his beliefs.
No, so I think that's indicative of the path that all of us are on, where we just never know where God's going to call us, where God's going to take us. So he was born, it's interesting, Laurie, last month we talked about St. Joan of Arc, and she died 1431. And 47 years later, St. Thomas More was born. And in England, he was born in London, February 7th, 1478. And it's just so amazing that the breath of God throughout history, he's always there. And we can go from St. Joan of Arc, died 1431, and then Thomas More, born 1478, touched by God in different but also similar ways. So he was born in London, and then... what happened after that, Laurie? He was well educated, I understand.
Absolutely, yes. He ultimately ended up at Oxford. People recognize he was quite intelligent. And there he fell in love with Greek literature. He was studying to be a lawyer, to go into the field of law. And it was interesting. They said his father only gave him enough money only for necessities, which... he looked back later and said that was probably really good, because then he had to focus on his studies and couldn't really get into any trouble while he was at Oxford. So, He
left Oxford. He became a lawyer, and then he trained in London until 1502. He was finally approved to begin practice. But as soon as he became a lawyer, he was thinking about another path in life. For 2 years, right after 1503 to 1504, he lived next to a Carthusian monastery. Mm-hmm. And he really was inspired by their call and lifestyle of simple piety and joined their spiritual exercises. So he was drawn to their faith after being a lawyer, but by 1504 he decided, well, I'm going to remain in the secular world and he was up for election to Parliament. But
he did keep some of the practices, some more of the aesthetic practices of the monks. Like apparently he wore a hair shirt under his clothing for most of his life, which I believe they still have as a relic. Was given to his daughter. He would do some of the penitential practices that they would engage in on Fridays. He recited the Office of Our Lady, so he still kept some of those practices as part of his life.
And you mentioned his daughter, his children. Thomas More married his first wife, Jane Colt, in 1505. They would have 4 children until, unfortunately, she passed away in 1511. And after Jane's death, Thomas quickly remarried to Alice Harper Middleton, a wealthy widow, and he adopted some of Alice Harper's own children, and that is why one of the things he's a patron of is adopted children.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
He was considered a doting father, and he often wrote letters to his children.
Yes, and something unusual, his daughters were very well educated. They valued education in their home. So
I think, not just by him, but that was important to him and to them.
Yes, absolutely.
And they became well known for their own academics.
Sure, yeah.
And then 1504, he was elected to Parliament to represent the region of Great Yarmouth. And in 1510, he rose to represent his hometown of London. Here in London, he earned a reputation as being honest and became a privy councillor in 1514. He was also effective, and he just knew his stuff, I guess, so to speak. And this is where he also really developed his skills as a theologian and a writer. And among his most famous works, I've never read this, Laurie, is Utopia. It's about a fictional, idealistic society. And I guess it's part satire, part social commentary. And it's considered...
he was known for his wit, indeed. So I bet it's a very witty book.
I don't know. Lawyers, to me at least, seem so dry. I come from a family of lawyers. I didn't follow that path. I'm sorry, family. Some of you are witty, but the lawyers that I know can be he seemed to be remarkably different than what I know, at least.
That's true. He had a little bit of joy, perhaps more joy than you would expect.
He had the Christian joy.
There you go. Joy of the gospel, yes.
Yes. Good reference. But then...
So he did catch the attention of the king, and that's how he gained... he sort of moved up, politically speaking. But it was funny. So his son-in-law later became his biographer. Apparently was very close. So there was something he said to him regarding, he had no misgivings about what his relationship was with the king. He once said to his son-in-law, "I tell you, I have no cause to be proud of, for if my head would win the king a castle in France, it should not fail to go." So he knew that, okay, if he pleased the king, then he would probably stay at court and keep his position. But if not, if it gained something better for the king, he'd probably lose his head. So he was witty about it, but he sort of knew where he stood politically.
Well, he quickly learned that you cannot serve 2 masters.
That is true.
Because he grew responsibility from Henry VIII. He was knighted in 1521, Sir Thomas More. So should we call him a Saint Sir or Sir Saint Thomas
He would
More?
just prefer Saint, I'm sure.
I guess a Saint. I'm sorry, that's right. Saint definitely comes before knighthood. Sainthood. I would take sainthood before knighthood. Sorry, Queen Elizabeth. I don't even think she's listening. But if you are. No, he was knighted and made under treasurer of the Exchequer, and Henry VIII's trust and liking of Thomas grew even more, and he was soon made Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. And then he became Lord Chancellor in 1521, and he became fiercely loyal to King Henry, and he prosecuted those accused of heresy, but he defended the Catholic Church in England, which was tough for him, but as long as he, like you were saying, Laura, as long as he enjoyed Henry's favor, he
could defend the faith, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. But then,
because Protestantism, of course, was gaining hold. Lutheran beliefs were spreading throughout Europe and throughout England. So he was battling against that.
But then something happened in regards to Henry's marriage to Catherine.
Yes. So Henry, of course, wanted an heir. That makes sense. So he decided to divorce Catherine of Aragon, who was not producing an heir for him, and wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. And he petitioned, Rome to be permitted to do so, and they said no. So that became an issue for him because he clearly wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. And he declared himself the supreme head of the church in England and broke with Rome and denying that the Pope had the authority to decide whether his marriage was valid or not. And that initially Thomas didn't have to necessarily speak on that or comment on that. And he was fine, but Henry took it to the point that he was requiring those who were in positions of authority to swear to the act of succession, saying that Anne Boleyn's any heirs produced would be rightful heirs, and to the oath of supremacy of Henry VIII as head of the church. So that obviously became an issue for Thomas. Initially, he tried to resign as chancellor, and they would not accept his resignation, but ultimately he did resign. But he was invited to the coronation of Anne Boleyn, and he refused to go. So that definitely also caused some issues with the king.
He did write a letter of congratulations, but I think more importantly, Henry wanted his new marriage justified. And for More to be absent during all of this, for King Henry, really, he felt undermined. His authority was undermined as head of the church, and state. And so then that is when charges became brought up against More. But More, really, he kind of had a spotless record, really. In this first instance, when King Henry tried to trap him, he was accused of accepting bribes. But there really wasn't any
no evidence of that, I'm sure.
So that was first one, bribery. Then it was conspiracy, because the rumor was that Thomas had allegedly consulted with a nun who prophesied against Henry and his wife Anne. But then More was like, no
evidence
I have
of
a
that
letter
either.
here which says that I told her, we even have her name, the nun, Elizabeth Barton, I told her not to interfere with politics. So, boom, bribery out the window, conspiracy
No conspiracy.
out the window.
Okay, so then it had to be treason. That was the only way he was going to get him.
The last defense for King Henry VIII.
Yes, but he didn't want to be a martyr. I mean, his family went in and said, please just sign this. It's just a piece of paper. Take this oath. It's okay. And of course, he said, my conscience tells me I cannot do this. That's the only thing I have that's mine. So I obviously can't compromise in this situation. And ultimately, that did lead to his death. Apparently, he was even sort of making jokes with the executioner right up to the point of his death. He was at peace with the situation, it would seem. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, that just goes to show his joy. He was ready to, for lack of a better term, go home to the Lord. Kind of. He realized who he was the first faithful servant to, the Lord.
It's true. Those were his parting words. I die the king's good servant, but God's first.
Yeah. The man for all seasons. He really was. He was a man of deep piety, as Laurie said, asceticism, self-discipline, and penitence. And his decapitated body was buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula at the Tower of London in an unmarked grave. And his head was put on display, actually, but his daughter Margaret, the feeling is she bribed someone to take it down, and the skull may actually be in a vault in Canterbury Church. So he was beatified by Pope Leo the 13th in 1886, and was canonized May 19th in 1935 by Pope Pius XI.
I didn't realize it was that recent. He was just canonized within 100 years. Wow. So
he I guess we're still learning about, there's still a lot to, I don't want to say contemporary, but it seems he's getting more, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
I believe, so the last couple years the bishops have done Fortnight for Freedom, focusing on religious freedom, and he is one of the patrons, obviously.
Yes, and that Fortnight, that's religious freedom, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So this whole idea, what Laurie and I have been talking about, is he could be in politics, but he realized he he couldn't compromise his own moral thoughts and beliefs, which is what we're not supposed to do. We can't serve two masters. We have to serve the Lord.
Right. We have to have the freedom to be Christians in the public square, not just on Sundays.
And I think, Laurie, you have a prayer, right?
I do, and it definitely shows his wit. So here's our closing prayer from St. Thomas More.
Okay, thanks, Lord.
Lord, grant me a holy heart that sees always what is fine and pure and is not frightened at the sight of sin, but creates order wherever it goes. Grant me a heart that knows nothing of boredom, weeping, or sighing. Let me not be too concerned with the bothersome thing I call myself. Lord, give me a sense of humor, and I will find happiness in life and profit for others. St. Thomas More.
Pray for us.